Get money from my worthless family, he laughed, refusing to pay for our daughter's surgery. A few days later, I found a rusty box in my grandfather's burned house. Soviet bonds worth 5 million rubles. I rushed home to tell him. And then I heard him and his mother plotting against me. If these stories mean something to you, please subscribe. Your subscription means more to me than you can imagine. It is motivation. It is the reason I continue telling these stories. And write in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's begin. The September wind carried the smell of burning across the wasteland where an old dacha once stood. Yaroslava Yakovlevna Gracheva stood at the edge of the property, 3 days after the fire, watching thin streams of smoke curl above the ruins like ghosts escaping from the ashes. At 34, Slava was used to expecting little from life. She worked as an accountant at a furniture factory on the outskirts of Yaroslavl, but her world had narrowed to 3 things: work, marriage, and most importantly, her daughter. The dacha belonged to her grandfather, Yakov Efremovich Solonin, a quiet war veteran who died 5 years ago at the age of 93. Now only birch trees remained here. Yaroslava Yakovlevna. She turned and saw her neighbor, Zoya Ilyinichna Rogova, making her way through the mud. The elderly woman had lived next door for 40 years. "Hello, Zoya Ilyinichna." The old woman shook her head sadly. "Your grandfather built this shed in 1965. I remember watching him." Slava nodded. She was not here out of sentimentality. She was desperate. Her daughter, Camelia, had turned 6 last month. She was a bright, beautiful child with her father's dark eyes and her mother's quiet determination, and she was very sick. Doctors at the Yaroslavl Regional Children's Clinical Hospital diagnosed her with a severe heart condition requiring surgery, difficult surgery, a complex procedure that had to be performed at a specialized clinic in Moscow. The cost was staggering, almost 2 million rubles. Slava had done everything she could. She spoke to the bank about a loan. She begged her husband, Gordy Mihailovich Grachev, to use their shared savings, but Gordy refused. "That's too much money," he said in an even tone, not looking her in the eyes. "We have other obligations. The apartment needs repairs. My mother needs help with her medication. Ask your family for help. Just once." "Your family?" As if she even had a family. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 19. Her grandfather was gone. The only relative she had left was a distant cousin on her mother's side living in Vladivostok, whom she had not seen for 15 years. "You don't understand," she begged him. "Camelia could die." Gordy shrugged. "Doctors always exaggerate. She'll be fine. Children are resilient." That was 2 weeks ago. Now she was sleeping in Camelia's room, listening in the darkness to her daughter's uneven breathing. And now she had come here, hoping, against everything, to find something valuable among the ruins. Zoya Ilyinichna kept talking. "All those old papers your grandfather kept, whole stacks of them. I used to tell him to throw them out, and he would say, 'Zoya Ilyinichna, paper has memory. Memory cannot be thrown away.'" Slava's attention sharpened. "What papers?" "Old newspapers, magazines, and bonds. I think Soviet bonds from the 1980s. Once he showed them to me, and I laughed and said they were worthless. And he said, 'You never know. History has a way of coming back.'" Slava's heart started pounding. Soviet bonds. She had heard something about compensation programs. Where did he keep them? Zoya Ilyinichna pointed at the collapsed shed. "In a metal box, an old ammunition box, under the workbench." Slava moved without thinking, crawling through mud and debris toward the ruins. "Careful, dear," Zoya Ilyinichna shouted after her. "It's not safe there." But Slava was already on her knees, pulling apart boards, ignoring the soot staining her hands and the sharp smell that made her eyes burn. She dug like someone possessed, throwing aside debris with strength she didn't even know she had. For 20 minutes she searched, and hope faded with every passing minute. The fire had done its work. Everything was destroyed. And then her fingers touched metal. She pulled, freeing the object from the rubble. It was a box the size of a large dictionary, blackened but still intact. The fire had not reached it. The workbench had collapsed in a way that shielded it, and the metal had held. Slava dragged the box out of the debris and sat back on her heels, breathing heavily. It was heavy. She looked at the latch, afraid to open it, afraid of what she might find, or not find, inside. Her hands trembled as she opened the latch. The box opened with a long creak. Inside, protected by metal from the elements, were stacks of papers, untouched, not even damaged. Perfectly preserved. Slava pulled out the top document. It was a USSR government bond certificate dated 1982, with a face value of 100 rubles. She pulled out another, and another. The box was full of them, dozens, maybe hundreds of bonds of different denominations. She sat in the dirt and ashes and cried. The office of Lavrenti Ilyich Malyutin was located on Kirov Street in a building built in 1950 and never renovated since. The elevator, as always, did not work, so Slava climbed to the third floor on foot, holding the metal box to her chest like a lifeline. Lavrenti Ilyich was an old friend of her grandfather, a lawyer who had worked in Yaroslavl for 40 years. He was a small, wiry man in his 70s, with thick glasses and a permanently worried expression. When Slava called him in the morning, he told her to come immediately. Now he sat at his cluttered desk, studying the bonds with such concentration that Slava wanted to scream. "Lavrenti Ilyich, please," she said. "Are they worth anything?" He looked at her over his glasses. "Yaroslava Yakovlevna, do you know what these are?" "Soviet bonds from 1982. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "But do you know what has happened to Soviet bonds in recent years?" She shook her head. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. In 2012, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia must compensate holders of Soviet bonds. Since then, there has been a program. It is complicated, bureaucratic, as you would expect, but it exists. People have received money, sometimes significant amounts. Slava's heart jumped. How significant? Lavrenti Ilyich picked up one of the bonds again. These are not just bonds. These are winning bonds, lottery bonds. They paid interest, and there were also prize drawings, cars, apartments. Your grandfather must have collected them for years. He reached for the calculator on his desk and began pressing buttons. Slava watched, barely breathing. With the compensation program, nominal value, interest, and inflation indexation. He paused, recalculated, then looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Yaroslava Yakovlevna, I cannot give an exact figure without full evaluation, but from what I see, these bonds could be worth around 4 to 5 million rubles, possibly more." The room spun. Slava gripped the armrests of the chair. 4 million, she whispered. At least. Possibly more. There are organizations in Moscow that specialize in this. They will help you process it. But yes, 4 million, maybe 5. That was enough. More than enough. The surgery cost 2 million. The rest could go toward post-operative care, travel, everything Camelia would need. Slava closed her eyes and silently thanked her grandfather, the quiet old man who kept paper because paper has memory. She didn't go home right away. She wandered through the center of Yaroslavl, trying to process what had happened. Past the golden domes of the Transfiguration Monastery, past the wide Volga River carrying its gray waters toward the sea. Hope and fear fought inside her. Her phone vibrated. "Gordy, where are you?" "My mother is coming for dinner." "Buy bread." She stared at the message, then put the phone away without replying. Gordy Mihailovich Grachev. Her husband of 8 years. Once he had seemed reliable, steady, and solid. Her grandfather had approved of him. Steadiness is good, Yakov Efremovich had said then. But steadiness had turned into stubbornness, reliability into emotional distance. Since Camelia's diagnosis, Gordy had withdrawn, leaving Slava alone with their daughter's illness. His mother, Milena Tarasovna, had never approved of her. Too quiet, she would say. Too secretive. And later, weak blood. My grandson deserved better. Slava endured it because she had no choice, no family, no money. The apartment was registered in Gordy's name. Everything belonged to him. But now she was walking home slowly. Thoughts swirled in her mind. She would tell him about the money. Everything would change. Camelia would get her surgery. They would pay off their debts, maybe even move somewhere better. But a quiet, cold voice whispered, would he change? She pushed the thought away. Their apartment was on the 5th floor of a prefabricated apartment building in the Frunzensky district, a residential area of identical gray high-rises stretching for kilometers. The elevator was working today, which was rare, and Slava, in a daze, went upstairs, still clutching the metal box. As she approached the door, she heard voices inside, Gordy's deep bass and his mother's sharp, piercing voice. Slava froze with the key in the lock. The door was old, poorly insulated. She could hear every word. I'm telling you, son, you need to think about yourself for once, Milena Tarasovna's voice cut like a knife. That child is sick. She has always been sick. And what does her mother bring? Nothing. No family, no money, no connections. Mom, please, Gordy's voice was tired, broken. I'm only saying what everyone thinks. You're still young. You could find someone else, someone with means. That Filipova from accounting, for example. She's divorced now, and her husband left her well off. She's been looking at you, I've seen it. Slava stood in the hallway, gripping the key so tightly that the metal cut into her palm. One operation will ruin you, Milena Tarasovna continued. And for what? For a child who may not even survive? You need to be practical. You need to think about your future. She is my daughter, Gordy's voice was barely audible. She is a burden, and so is her mother. You work yourself to exhaustion while she sits at home with that sick girl. What kind of life is that? You deserve better. Slava waited for Gordy to defend her. To defend their daughter. To tell his mother to stop. Silence stretched. You see? Milena Tarasovna said softly. You know I'm right. Deep down, you know it. And then Gordy spoke, and his words shattered everything. I know, Mom. I know. I just don't know how to get out of this. Slava's world stopped. There are ways, Milena Tarasovna said. Lawyers, divorce. You need to be smart, make sure she gets nothing. The apartment is yours, thank God. And since she has no family or means, she'll have no choice but to leave, take the girl, and go. And Camelia? The pause that followed was worse than any words. Children need stability, Milena Tarasovna said carefully. They need two parents. If you remarry quickly and create a proper home, the court may see that as the better option. That was when Slava understood. They weren't just planning to divorce her. They were planning to take Camelia. She stood in the hallway, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. The metal box suddenly felt heavy, heavy with possibility, heavy with choice. She could walk in, tell them about the money, watch their faces change, see Gordy humiliated and his mother retreat, pretending she had never said any of it. Or she could leave. She could take the box, take Camelia, and never come back. The doorknob was cold under her hand. Inside, Milena Tarasovna kept speaking, her voice a steady stream of poison and calculation. Gordy stayed silent, agreeing with every word. Slava made her choice. She stepped away from the door without a sound, like a ghost, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button. When it arrived, she went down to the first floor and left the building without looking back. She picked Camelia up early from school at the gray stone building on Leningradsky Prospect. The teachers knew her situation and asked no questions when she signed the form. Mom? Camelia looked up at her with dark eyes, so much like her father's. "Why are you here?" "It's okay," Slava said, kneeling and taking her daughter's small hands. "Camelia, my love, we're going on an adventure. Just you and me. Okay?" The child's face lit up. "An adventure? Like in fairy tales?" "Exactly like in fairy tales. We're going to Moscow to meet very important people. And then, my sweet girl, we're going to make you well." The Moscow clinic was everything the doctors in Yaroslavl had promised: modern, clean, efficient. The surgeons were confident. The prognosis was good. Slava stayed in a small hotel near the clinic and walked every day to sit by Camelia's bedside. The surgery lasted 6 hours. During that time, she stayed in the hospital chapel, lighting candles before the icon of the Kazan Mother of God, praying with a strength she had never known before. When the surgeon finally came out, tired but smiling, Slava collapsed against the wall and cried for the second time in weeks. "The operation was successful," he said. "Your daughter will make a full recovery." Camelia spent 2 weeks recovering, growing stronger every day. Slava stayed by her side every minute, holding her hand, reading stories, watching color return to her cheeks. When they finally returned to Yaroslavl, they had a certificate of full recovery and a heart beating strong and steady. But the battle wasn't over. Gordy filed for divorce, just as his mother had planned, and he also demanded custody of Camelia. The Yaroslavl Regional Court was located on Kirov Street, an imposing Soviet-era building with tall columns and a stern facade. On a cold November morning, Slava climbed the courthouse steps with her lawyer, Taras Filipovich Ipatov, a bulldog recommended by Lavrenti Ilyich. He was over 50, broad-shouldered, balding, with the face of a man who had seen every trick and invented a few new ones himself. Key point, Article 36 of the Family Code, he explained to her before the hearing. Inheritance received during marriage, but from your family, is your personal property. It is not jointly owned. He has no rights to this money. But he claims I hid it from him, Slava said. That I abandoned the family. Taras Filipovich gave a dark smile. Let them try. We have more than just the law on our side. The courtroom was cold, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. Gordy sat at the defendant's table with his mother and a thin, nervous lawyer Slava did not know. Milena Tarasovna wore her best coat and an expression of offended dignity. Gordy avoided looking at Slava. The judge was a strict woman in her 60s named Nina Sergeyevna Kalyagina. Gray hair pulled into a tight bun, rimless glasses, and a presence that made lawyers straighten their backs. She reviewed the documents in front of her, then looked up. Case number 4832. Grachev vs. Gracheva. Divorce proceedings with a custody dispute. Her voice was flat and professional. I have reviewed the initial filings. We will begin. The first to speak was Gordy's lawyer. He spoke of abandonment, how Slava had left the marital home without explanation, taking the child without consent. He painted a picture of an unstable mother, a woman without family support, without financial means, without stability. My client, he said, is a stable, employed man with secure housing. His mother, Milena Tarasovna Gracheva, is ready to assist in caring for the child. They can provide the structure and safety she needs. Taras Filipovich rose slowly, deliberately. He always moved slowly, Slava had realized, because it unsettled people. Your Honor, he began. The plaintiff speaks of abandonment but omits the reason. He speaks of stability but omits the fact that he refused to pay for a life-saving operation for his daughter. The courtroom fell silent. May I approach? Taras Filipovich asked. The judge nodded. He placed a document in front of her. This is a certificate from the Yaroslavl Regional Children's Clinical Hospital dated August 15 of this year. It confirms that Camelia Gordievna Gracheva required urgent cardiac surgery. Cost, 2 million rubles. He placed another document. This is a bank statement showing that the Grachevs had sufficient savings to cover these expenses. And a third. This is a transcript of a recording. A conversation between the defendant and his mother, recorded by my client the day she discovered her inheritance. The recording itself is included in the case file. Milena Tarasovna's face went pale. Gordy gripped the edge of the table. Taras Filipovich began to read. One operation will ruin you. And for what? For a child who may not even survive. Children need stability. They need two parents. If you remarry quickly and create a proper home, the court may see that as the better option. The judge's expression did not change, but something cold appeared in her eyes. Gordy's lawyer jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. This recording was made without consent. It is inadmissible evidence. Taras Filipovich smiled. The recording was made in a shared corridor outside the marital apartment. My client did not enter the home. She remained in a common area of the building. Under Russian law, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in a shared hallway. Judge Kalyagina raised her hand. I will review the recording in chambers. Continue. Taras Filipovich delivered his next blow. My client did not abandon her family. She fled a husband who, together with his mother, planned to divorce her, take her daughter, and leave her with nothing. At the same time, she discovered that her grandfather left her a significant inheritance, enough to save her daughter's life. He placed more documents before the judge. These are the bond certificates, valued at 4.7 million rubles. This is documentation from the Moscow clinic where Camelia underwent surgery, fully paid for by my client. This is a lease agreement for the apartment where they now live, stable housing in the city center. He turned to Gordy. The plaintiff claims he wants custody, yet when his daughter was dying, he refused to help. He told my client to get money from her worthless family. Now that the money exists, he wants half of it. And he wants the child, not because he loves her, but because his mother told him to. Gordy rose abruptly. That's a lie. Sit down, Judge Kalyagina said quietly. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Taras Filipovich delivered his final blow. Your Honor, I would like to call a witness, Zoya Ilyinishna Rogova. The elderly woman stepped forward, small and nervous, dressed in her best dress. She was sworn in and took the witness stand. Zoya Ilyinishna, Taras Filipovich asked gently. Were you present when Yaroslava Yakovlevna discovered the bonds? Yes, young man, I was there. I told her where to look. Her grandfather, Yakov Efremovich, may he rest in peace, showed me that box many years ago. I remembered it. And have you ever met Gordy Mikhailovich Grachev? Zoya Ilyinishna's face hardened. Once, many years ago at the dacha, he kept complaining, saying the place was a dump, that Yakov Efremovich was a hoarder. And his mother? She glanced at Milena Tarasovna. She didn't even go inside. She sat in the car with the windows closed, as if she was afraid of catching something. Thank you, Zoya Ilyinishna. No further questions. Gordy's lawyer declined cross-examination. There was nothing to ask. Judge Kalyagina announced her decision a week later. Slava sat in the same courtroom, holding Camelia's small hand. The child was healthy, rosy-cheeked, with bright eyes, though she did not fully understand what was happening. Across the aisle, Gordy and his mother sat in stone-like silence. Divorce is granted, Judge Kalyagina read from her decision. The marriage is dissolved. The primary fault lies with the defendant. She paused, looking at Gordy. Regarding the division of property, the inheritance received by Yaroslava Yakovlevna Gracheva from her grandfather, Yakov Efremovich Solonin, is her personal property under Article 36 of the Family Code. It was received during the marriage but from her relatives, and therefore is not subject to division. The bonds and all proceeds from them belong exclusively to the defendant. Slava closed her eyes, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding for an eternity. Regarding custody of the minor child, Camelia Gordievna Gracheva. Judge Kalyagina looked up, scanning Gordy and his mother. The court has examined all evidence, including the recorded conversation. The plaintiff's claim that he is the more stable parent is refuted by his own words. He was prepared to deny his daughter life-saving medical treatment. He discussed with his mother a plan to take the child from her mother not out of concern for the child's welfare, but to punish the mother and gain access to her inheritance. Milena Tarasovna made a sound like a wounded animal. Gordy stared straight ahead, his face gray. Custody of the minor child is granted exclusively to the mother, Yaroslava Yakovlevna Gracheva. The plaintiff is granted visitation rights by order of the family court, to be determined later. He is also required to pay child support in the amount of 25% of his monthly income, beginning this month. Judge Kalyagina set down the papers. The hearing is closed. As they stood to leave, Gordy grabbed Slava's hand. For a moment, something like desperation flashed in his eyes. "Slava, please. I didn't want this. She forced me." Slava looked at him, the man she had loved for 8 years, who had refused to save their daughter, who had planned to take her child and leave her with nothing. She gently removed his hand from hers. "Don't contact me again," she said. "If you want to see Camelia, go through the court." She paused at the door. "And Gordy? I hope it was worth it. The money you thought you would get. I hope it keeps you warm at night." 3 months later, on a cold December morning, Slava stood by the window of her new apartment, a 2-room place on Respublican Street overlooking the church of Elijah the Prophet. It was modest, but it was theirs, hers and Camelia's. Behind her, Camelia played on the floor with dolls, healthy, happy, whole. The surgery had been completely successful. There was a knock at the door. A courier handed her a large bouquet of white roses. The note had no signature, but she recognized Zoya Ilyinishna's handwriting. "These are from your grandfather's garden. I took cuttings many years ago. They bloom every September, just like him, quietly and strongly. He would be proud of you." Slava held the roses, watching her daughter play. Outside, church bells rang for evening service. She thought of her grandfather, who kept paper because paper has memory, who left her not just wealth, but a future. And she thought of the conversation she had overheard, the words that freed her as much as they wounded her. Without them, she might have stayed, shared the money, lived a life with a man who saw her daughter as a burden. Some gifts arrive wrapped in fire. Some truths are born from ashes. Slava smiled. She placed the roses on the table and walked to her daughter on the floor. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please like, share with your loved ones, and subscribe to my channel.